Let's end this. What's up, guys? My name's Brandon McNulty. I'm a writer, and welcome to my writing channel. Today we're going to talk about the subject of writing endings. And this is something that a lot of writers just absolutely hate, because when you write a story, you lay down the groundwork, you do the setup, and then you motor through the rest of the story until you get to the very end. And once you get to that ending, it can be hard to just slam on the brake and bring everything to a halt and just tie everything up neatly. But today I got 6 tips that'll help you write better endings. Number 1, circularity. Circularity is the idea of bringing your story full circle by mentioning something at the end of the story that was first brought up near the beginning. Now, you can do this in a lot of different ways. Typically, the best way of doing it is to just figure out certain elements that you brought up at the beginning of the story, whether they be images or symbols or even a line of dialogue. There are so many different things you can do here, but the point is, figure out something at the beginning of the story and then bring it up again at the end in order to show how much things have changed. Now, I think one of the best examples out there of this, one of the easiest ones to understand, if you've ever seen The Dark Knight Rises, you know that early on in the story, Alfred has that conversation with Bruce Wayne where he tells Bruce that he wishes Bruce could just move on from the life of Batman and just settle down and be happy. And during that scene, we get a glimpse into Alfred's mind. We get to see him picturing Bruce happy with a woman. They're at a coffee shop. We don't know where it is or who he's with, but the important thing is that Alfred envisions a happy life for Bruce. And then, if you remember, at the end of the movie, we see Alfred at the cafe. He looks up, he sees Bruce with Catwoman. Everything's all right. Bruce gives him a sly smile. And it's a great way to end the movie because it causes the audience to think back to the beginning, look at the characters, how they've changed, how things worked out, and it just makes you think about the movie as a whole. And that's the point of circularity. Number 2, figure out whether your ending will leave things resolved or unresolved. This is pretty self-explanatory, but I do need to point out that depending on the type of story you're writing, you may want to either resolve things or leave them open-ended. For instance, if you're writing a standalone novel, it's best to resolve things and just, give the audience a sense of closure. If you have plans for sequels, or if you already have the entire series planned out, then of course, yes, you can leave things open-ended. Now, if you're writing a short story, those will almost always be open-ended. And usually short stories end with a character making a choice. And when they make that choice, we don't get to see how their life plays out after that decision is made. The audience is typically left to wonder how the character will go about living their life from this point on. Number 3 is a follow-up to number 2, and it's tie up your loose ends. Another one that's pretty self-explanatory, but I had to throw it out there. If you forget any loose ends in your story, your audience will nail you for it. They always pick these things up. If you remember at the end of season 1 of Stranger Things, everybody was like, "Where's Barb? Where's Barb?" Every little thing that you mention in your novel, be aware that if it has any sort of impact and you don't have a payoff at the end or later on in the story, if you don't do that, your audience will they will pick it apart, they will point it out, they will just never let you live it down. So don't forget about that. Number 4 is a very important one, and it's that you should find a balance between satisfying your audience and surprising your audience at the end. Oftentimes, writers will think that it's okay to just shoot for one or the other. Either we go for the crazy twist ending or we go for the satisfying ending that the audience wanted all along. But I think if you really want to take a step forward as a writer, you need to mix the two together. You need to give the audience the ending that the characters earned, and you also need to throw some sort of surprise in there. Otherwise, it gets too predictable. For instance, if you've ever watched a Hallmark movie, you probably know that they all end exactly the same. The couple lives happily ever after, they win the pie baking contest, and their restaurant is the talk of the town, and they are no longer in financial trouble. That is how every Hallmark movie ends. Now you might say, well, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with giving the audience a satisfying ending? And I'd tell you that the problem is, if you do that, the ending will be forgettable, and you cannot afford to write stories with forgettable endings. Endings should have impact. Your readers should remember them months after they close the book, years after they close the book. If you hope that your readers will pass on your book to other people, will tell people about it at dinner parties or wherever it is, you have to leave them with an ending that has impact. Now, in order to give an ending that has impact, you have to throw some kind of surprise in there. And it may be tempting to just go crazy and go with the wildest twist you can think of and just throw it down right at the end of the story. But my number 5 tip is that you cannot force a twist ending. This is something that can be tempting because audiences typically love a good twist ending. Think about the original Planet of the Apes. That's a great example of one. It's something that keeps you thinking about that movie for years after you've seen it. Now, while twist endings can be a good thing, if they are not earned, they will piss off your audience, I guarantee you. For instance, a few years ago, I read the book My Sister's Keeper by Jodi Picoult, and I thought for the first 99% of it, I thought it was one of the best books I've ever read. And it was about this girl who was born solely for the purpose of providing bone marrow to her sister, who had this disease, and the parents just decided on having another kid just to help save the first one. And it was this sick, twisted story. It was just really just a gripping read, and I just mowed through it in a couple days. And when I got to the ending, out of nowhere in like the last 10 pages, the most out of left field twist hit me, and it just didn't work at all with the story, and I was just so frustrated with it. And for me, like, it just completely betrayed me as a reader. And I'll be honest with you, I have not read a Jodi Picoult novel since, just because those last 10 pages completely invalidated everything that came before it. And it was so frustrating for me. I've heard that the movie version's different, but I read the book, and it's just, I still can't get over it. But the point is that you should never do this to your readers. You don't want to betray your readers by forcing some twist at the end. If you set up a twist properly, that's great. But if you just throw in a twist for the sake of twist at the end, it's not going to work. They're going to see through it, and they're just never going to go near you again. Finally, my number 6 tip is to end the story by not simply answering questions, but also by raising a question or two. And what this does, yes, you can wrap up a story and you can tie up all the loose ends and you can just end things off perfectly, but if you end things a little too perfectly, it can cause the fiction to feel too fiction-y, for lack of a better word. And I think the thing is, if you are writing a story, you want it to have some level of realism, some level of authenticity where it can be a real place. And in order to fully pull that off, you have to leave your readers with the idea that the book extends beyond the final page, that the characters' journeys don't end when they close the book, but they're still out there somewhere. And the way to do this is to raise some question or another that signals to the reader that there is still work to do out there. It may not be as severe as the main conflict in your story, but characters are people who are constantly growing. So if you can end a story by hinting at future character growth, or hinting at a future relationship between characters, or potential healing, or some kind of hopeful event in the future, if you can do that, your story will have more authenticity, it'll click with your readers, and it'll just expand beyond the pages of the book. It's something I highly recommend you do. Question of the day: what is the worst ending you've ever come across in a work of fiction? Let us know in the comments section below, and be sure to mark for spoilers. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to check out my other videos. Hit the like and subscribe buttons for me. Share this video with a friend if you don't mind. And as always, remember to keep on writing.